Thank you everyone for joining. Today we're hearing from Jonathan Poon, our Chief Security Officer, and Carlos Bello, our AI engineer. They'll jump right into the briefing and we'll have a Q&A at the end. John, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome, thanks. Um, yeah, so we thought we'd put the session together, just kind of talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we're doing in AI security, and some of sort of the lessons learned along the way, and kind of how we've been able to operationalize some of the use of AI as part of what we're doing in security. So, um, I, I guess just sort of rewind, back 3, 4 years ago when we first got started in this, it was, sort of everybody trying to use ChatGPT, right? There was all that buzz. Um, and, I think we did what most people did at first, right? Is, hey, we don't really have great ways of controlling data loss outside of the norm, and sort of DLP capability we already have in place. So, I think we do need to sort of block some of this tech. And ultimately, as they released APIs and whatnot, we ended up actually giving access to um, the OpenAI chatbot just via our Slack application, right? So we came up with basically a user, we called it a partner, right? And it was just a wrap around the OpenAI's API. So people could ask questions, right, get responses, and use AI however they saw fit, right? And as part of that, we were actually logging the chats, right? And obviously, that allowed us to do sort of the next level of monitoring, right? Understanding what people were using it for, um, you know, uh, sort of monitor any kind of data loss that might be happening and being able to sort of block and retract that way. So that ended up working, fairly well. People were using it, and actually, upon reviewing a lot of that data, it turns out, yeah, lots of people were actually using it for things that you would hope that they would use it for in a work setting, right? So they were doing research, right? Sort of learning about things they didn't necessarily know. So it was, ended up being one of those tools I think people were very happy that they had access to, and ultimately were pretty useful. Fast forward that, and we run a software development team, right? So we've got somewhere around the neighborhood of about 60 or so software developers, Carlos being one of those. And so we've sort of dove in building applications that actually utilized AI. And one of those I want to talk to you, Carlos, about, just because you were deeply involved in this, right? Is talk a little bit, or maybe share with us, right, what that application was, around red teaming and sort of using LLMs to assist in that process.
Yeah, so we had a customer who had this need for a red teaming assistant, basically. So uh, the joke in Silicon Valley now is everyone's building a copilot for blank. This was a copilot for pen testers. And what we were finding was the friction points for pen testers, especially those in environments that were more controlled, so like disconnected from the internet and all of that, was they needed access to information and documentation. So, for example, they need to write a quick script, but they couldn't reference the Python documentation because it's not available. Or they need to check MITRE ATT&CK data or the CVE database, but since they have no internet, they'd have to step outside and go get that info and come back in. And so we noticed that was one thing that was really making their job really hard. So we realized LLMs are really good at knowledge tasks. So we were able to get all of this knowledge, put it on a local database, and have it accessible to these pen testers uh, on their command and control server. So everywhere from where they're controlling all of their pen testing activities, they get access to all of this information that usually is on the internet, but this is completely running locally. So we found a way to run it locally on a laptop and have it accessible to all these pen testers. So now these pen testers had access to all this knowledge without having to be on internet. All of their questions were being processed locally with local LLMs. One of the struggles was a lot of the questions that pen testers asks, LLMs will actually refuse to answer it. So we were able to modify the LLM weights so that we could get the LLM to say stuff like, "Oh, write me malware for Eternal Blue," and it will actually respond and write you the malware. The other friction point that we saw was in report writing after the pen test, right? And we realized that our command control server actually collects these logs, has information about the actual exercise that's happening, and we wrote these custom pipelines that pull in those logs, that pull in that information from the command and control server, hand it off to the AI, and start writing up some of the like pre-write some of the parts of this pen testing report at the end of the report. Our customer had told us that it sometimes takes up to a week or even 2 weeks to write a report after a pen test, and to have the AI automatically pull this information, reference the right resources. So, uh, checks the MITRE ATT&CK framework, checks the CVE database, checks all these other frameworks, and writes that document with all that knowledge. And then now the pen tester just has to re-reference, like recheck the information if it's all aligned with what they actually imagine. And then they just have to click export PDF, and there they have a written document. So what we were able to build was something that really uh, took the highest friction points from um, what they were working on and make it much simpler, like automate a lot of that pipeline.
So, which is crazy because like one of those things, that I guess I wonder about, right, is then how are we training, right? How is it that you can train this LLM, right, for this kind of activity? Since most of them are putting guardrails in place, right? Like if I go to ChatGPT and ask it to write malware, right, like it won't do it. So I guess as part of this exercise here, right, is like how are you getting it to do stuff like that?
Yeah, so there are three main ways I'd say you would train a model, right? Um, the most expensive way that you're seeing these big labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta. This is called the first stage in training, which is called the pre-training stage. This is the expensive one that you're hearing costs like hundreds of millions of dollars, and you need a cluster of 10,000 GPUs. That's kind of that's the expensive one that none of us realistically are going to do. That one you need data sets of 10 trillion tokens. So like think of token as like a word. So 10 trillion words to train a model like that. Realistically, no one is going to be training models like that except if you belong to one of those big labs. Next stage of that is called the fine tuning stage. So this fine tuning stage is where you get that base model and you train it to speak the way you want it to. So think of like if you have a customer support bot, you want it to respond differently from like a coding assistant bot, right? So that's where that fine tuning stage works, where you actually get it to answer the way you want it to. And this is where we have a lot of control over, and this is something that people can actually do on their own hardware, like with a couple GPUs or like just a very beefy laptop. You could do fine tuning to get these LLMs to talk the way you want it to. And this is where we really focused on for this to get it to be able to say things that it was fine tuned out of the box not to be able to say. We were able to fine tune it to be able to say whatever we wanted it to say. Then there's
Got
the
it.
final stage, which is in context learning. So this is not really training, but it's basically letting the LLM fetch data on its own so it can respond. And so like the MITRE ATT&CK data that changes sometimes, it will pull the most recent one and respond with that. So those are kind of the three ways you would train a model.
All right, and I know that this, a lot of times sort of leads into people when they're building applications with LLMs, right? In addition to sort of the training exercise that they're going through, it sounds like fine tuning. Um, the thing that I'm always thinking about, from that CISO role, right, is what is it that we then need to do to secure this? So the one that you're talking about here runs offline. So right, in a security sort of sense, is not really accessible outside on the network. It's not just floating around the network. So maybe I'm not as worried about securing that particular application, right? But if I am running, say, a web app that is, I don't know, like a customer support app that you're talking about, right? Well, I am going to need to sort of put controls in place to make sure that people aren't attacking that. Now, when I think of an AI app, right, most times this stuff is web accessible, right? So how is this different, I guess, securing those types of applications than, say, your standard web app, right? Because like when I think about things that we put into place today to secure web apps, I've got maybe like a WAF in front of it. I'm going to sort of do source code analysis. I'm doing dynamic analysis, right? Static code analysis. I'm checking third-party libraries, right? Those kinds of things. I'm hardening the OSs these run on. Maybe I've got little IDE plugins, right, for devs to check code. So we're already sort of doing all of these things to secure the development process in a lot of the web apps that we build. So like, if I'm underpinning now a web app with, say, an LLM, right, to sort of AIify it, are there other things that you've been looking at, right, that we should be sort of considering and adding to that stack in order to secure these apps?
Yeah. I would say, from my experience at least, a lot of the pen tests, like a lot of what you need to secure is related to that usual like web dev like safety. So like a
But
lot of
there's
your
still all
vulnerabilities,
those controls still kind of
yeah.
those are all still valid controls to have.
Yeah, so you're still going to want to do your code scanning. You're still going to want to do your infrastructure scanning. Like all of that is still going to be part of this application. Now, there will be LLM specific risks or Gen AI specific risks, and you can look at the OWASP top 10 for LLMs and for Gen AI. And it's kind of, it will cover a lot of these risks. The big one that like everyone knows about that you're probably hearing all about is like prompt injection. And that one's kind of taking advantage of the indeterministic nature of these LLMs. And it's actually really hard to protect against prompt injection. One of the things you would try to do to protect against it is using tooling from a lot of these AI companies. So AWS has one, Azure has one, Google has one, and there's a bunch of third-party ones. It's like guardrails, model armor, content filters, where it basically tries to detect this prompt injection before it reaches the LLM and intercepts it. And you can also do it on the way out, where like if someone asks something and it gets through on the way in, it will catch it on the response side of things for safety, toxicity, whatever. Um, and what we're finding is actually all of these are not 100% effective. I can literally hop on a Discord group or like an IRC channel for people who just post lists of prompts that break each of these things. So it's not easy. It's very, very easy to break through past that. So what we tend to recommend to our customers now is that you need to protect it at an architectural level. So what does that mean? It's like, sure, you can't protect fully against toxicity, but if you're having this thing make API calls for you. Now that we're entering this agentic phase of AI, where we're having it do things on behalf of the user, how are you making sure that this AI doesn't actually do things that are actually dangerous, right? You shouldn't let your AI delete your production database. You shouldn't have your AI have access to that, because if you can just give the wrong instruction to this thing, or someone can prompt inject it to do something bad, that's how we get the risk. So it's really controlling it in that architectural level that it doesn't have access to these things. One of the other things we're doing is when clients do have these applications, we do recommend we do an AI pen test where end to end we try, like I personally will try to break into your AI application and get it to say things or do things that it's not supposed to be doing. And so far, we've had great success breaking all these LLMs. And so I think it's really from the architecture side. It's including some of this tooling like Model Guard, and then after that, while it's in production, doing these AI pen tests and making sure that it's not vulnerable to these kinds of attacks.
And when you're talking about like efficacy of these things, right? Like one of the things I guess that it reminds me of is like EDR, right? Like endpoint anti-malware, right? At best case, 50%, success rates in terms of blocking like no malware, right? Like, do we have any sort of sense in terms of like how good some of these, things like guardrails or model armor is, as far as like stopping prompt injection, right? Because like I know there's lists and things that we run through, in pen testing these apps, right? Where you're essentially testing a bunch of these prompts. I know even silly stuff like running the same prompt multiple times in a row, just because, these things are non-deterministic, right? Like sometimes, even though you asked it the question and you ask it the same thing 3, 4, 5 times in a row, it'll deny or give you, the negative response, but then sort of on the fifth time, magically, it gives you the answer for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
So like, is there any sense for efficacy on this kind of stuff?
I don't know if there's like a number I can assign to it, but I can tell you that every single one that's out there has been broken. And like that information's readily published by people who are doing this. It's just you need to do a bit of looking around, but each of these have a vulnerability, and it gets patched pretty quickly, but then someone just finds a new one. And so that's kind of uh I think Sam Altman came out like a few months ago and just said this is never going to be a solved problem. Like he said this is probably one of the biggest risks to LLMs is this will never be fully solved, and at most it's going to be a 95% solved problem. But we're not even there
Okay.
yet.
So there's things that we can do then. It's one of those, it sounds like, where it's like you got to have it, right? It's not going to stop
Hmm.
everything. It's like social
Hmm.
engineering, right? Like you're never going to sort of perfectly train every single user to be immune to social engineering. It's just in the
Hmm.
sense we're essentially social engineering the AI.
Exactly.
Okay. Um, I know there's other stuff too, right? Like I know, things like guardrails, right? You can sort of augment that even more, right? And just filter out even keywords and just not even have the AI attempt to answer it, right? It's got the keyword already,
Yeah.
drop it. It just never even
Yeah.
gets it looked at.
Yeah.
So there are other sort of layers to this, I suppose, that we should be implementing at the app layers, in addition to whatever controls and guardrails you'll put into place there.
Hmm. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
a lot of it is at the architecture, like the way you design the application in the first place needs to make sure that these, like even if someone was able to prompt inject it, that it wouldn't be capable of doing anything that's disastrous, right?
Gotcha. Okay. So obviously, like that pen testing app, right? The sort of red teaming assist. That's a pretty big project, right? Like a lot of effort. A lot of devs, on that team sort of go into introducing something like that. But it doesn't always have to be super heavyweight, sort of these big complex applications, right?
Hmm.
I know that there's a lot of like really simple use cases that we've actually started doing as well, just to help the security teams, do what they do. So I know that silly things like email tagging, right? Like just
Hmm.
organizing emails in your inbox and having AI, go through the inbox, tag stuff, group it, categorize it. So hey, this email looks like it's related to a meeting request, or this thing's looking for some kind of follow up, or uh, you know that kind of stuff, right? So tagging emails, I think, is a super easy one. Other things like I know we've built one and deployed it where if you want to opt into this, I send lots of emails, right? Like I got a lot of stuff going to customers, the partners, right? Other sort of peers in the industry. Sometimes I'm asking a question, and again, just sheer volume, you may ask it and just kind of forget about it for a few days, if not a week, right? But now we've got the sort of AI plugged in so that a couple times a week, I get a digest of emails that I've sent that look like they should be followed up, but I never actually got a response, right? So it makes it much faster for me to sort of, without sifting through my inbox, to say, oh, did I ever hear back from that person, right? Sort of searching by their name or subject or whatever, right? That I just get this digest and I can sort of scan through it and be like, oh yeah, these are over here, and I go hunt that down and follow up with the response, right? So real basic stuff like that. I know we've even sort of built things like for our SOC 2 compliance, right? Like we've got to maintain attendee logs for people visiting the SOC, and so at first we had this iPad application, and it sort of does the job, right? You check in, you sign your name, put your email, those kinds of things. I know we just rewrote that, right? Updated with the new UI and design language, and did the whole thing with the assist of AI. So, which I think brings me to my next question is, you know, you're a software developer. My background's in software development, and so for me to sort of conceptualize and go build an application like this and have AI act as like the assistant speeds that process up quite a bit. Um,
Hmm.
which I think there was something that was interesting that was rolled out for us anyway, and I've had conversations with others that are doing this. But can you talk a little bit about what it's like running um, local LLMs, right? So I think you guys sort of first discovered that capability by this sort of red teaming application. But what is that like at scale, and sort of when you open it up to these generic use cases? Like, can I just start opening up the LLMs to all employees at this point?
Yeah. So there's a mixed answer to that. Of course, the what we're calling the frontier models, the SOTA models, the state of the art models, they're definitely uh, better at certain things than some of these open source models. We're, however, running a lot of open source models locally at Novacoast, even on my own laptop. If you have a MacBook with lots of RAM, you can run these models, right? So right now the Chinese models, and there's also OpenAI's latest models are probably topping the leaderboards right now. There's websites like Artificial Analysis you can check out, which basically lists out each model and what they're good at and how much it costs to run. Um, a lot of these models nowadays, like the free and open source ones, are like 80-90% of the state of the art. And you can run it on your own hardware. So like we've like our own Novacoast hardware, we're running some of these large models Kimi like these large Quen models from Alibaba. They're pretty much on par at coding with some of the smaller models from OpenAI and Claude. Um, and like I've personally like been using it to do some agentic coding tasks in the background where while I'm writing code, it will go spin off some other task in the background where it's coding some other features for me. So I can have it's basically like as a dev, I can be functioning like as if I had a team of developers under me, which is great. Like I can really move at such higher velocity. Now, I think the question of can I open this up to everybody? There definitely is some possible data leakage. I wouldn't trust it with our company's secret documents, our client secret documents especially. So like should we mass allow ChatGPT in the company? Yes, with an asterisk at the end that we like at Novacoast, our policy has been you can write code using ChatGPT, using these third-party applications, but the moment you start processing Novacoast or customer information, we have to start using these local models, which are not that hard to set up. And like we've been running them for the past couple of weeks, and it past couple of months, and it's been amazing for what we needed to do.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that just simply scares with hardware too, right? It's like you can,
Hmm.
I mean, run this stuff on like a Mac Studio, no problem, right? But it's
Hmm.
going to be a little slower. Maybe you're running a smaller model to your point, but like if we're running, the sort of max size offline models we can get, probably going to need to throw some bigger hardware at that. That's kind of where it was.
Hmm. Yeah, the,
Um,
the hardware has become more affordable for sure, and like a lot of the way you have to design the tooling around it is that you should be okay to wait a couple minutes before you get a response instead of the instantaneous one that you get from OpenAI.
yeah, like some of that stuff, we're talking about like the bulk email analysis and digging
Hmm.
for, uh, emails that need responding like that stuff can be done, in bulk, right? As a batch process or something they can run and,
Hmm.
I get it when I get it kind of a thing, right? It's not something that's super urgent. So, um, I know that stuff has been good from sort of keeping cost caps, right? At a steady state, predictable amount, right? We bought the hardware, we can sort of use it as much as we want. Yeah,
Hmm.
performance takes a little bit of a hit, but you know what? At some point where the workload sort of exceeds the capabilities of the hardware, then no problem. We'll throw some more hardware at it, right? But I think
Hmm.
right now that's been pretty good for some of these like smaller projects. But um, again, like for me, like using Visual Studio U, right? Sort of using these AI agents. I guess I have this thought of like, and those apps as an example, like we even have like custom door locks, right? Like we wrote
Hmm.
these custom door locks when you enter the offices. They're tied to this corporate app, right? Um, I know that kind of stuff used to be pretty slow, and using AI to sort of develop applications in, let's say, Python, right? Real easy, tons of Python code that they've been training on,
Hmm.
right? Pretty dang good. If we're coding in Rust, right? A lot less code available to learn on, train on,
Hmm.
not nearly as good. But I do know, like our CTO Adam Gray, right? He rewrote the door lock system, which
Yeah.
on the firmware side of that is C code, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I just walked into the offices the other day and was just walking in trying it out, and that thing runs exactly how you would expect a door lock to run, right? I hit the
Yeah.
door, I unlock it, MFA's me, and then boom, click, the door's unlocked. Whereas used to be a solid 8 to 10 seconds, right, for that processing to sort of make the round trip for the MFA
Hmm.
push in and come back and sort of come back. So like that's where I had the thought is like, well, hang on a second. Like if I can take somebody, who isn't a software developer and all of a sudden they're writing firmware and they're rebuilding iOS apps that took, you know, a developer months to build, and now they're doing it in the course of a day with an AI assistant. Like, why can't I just roll this out to them? Like, why isn't my sales team using this to do, I don't know, sales apps and things like that?
Yeah. That's a great question, and what we're starting to see is like those with a technical background, they're really going to excel at AI application building, basically. Like for example, Adam, who's our CTO, he was able to rewrite the firmware for our door locks, as you said, and rewrite our entire iOS app for unlocking the door locks, using native Swift, which is like he didn't really have
Yeah,
much knowledge writing native
right. I
Swift,
was gonna say, I know
and it,
he's not a Swift developer.
yeah, and he's also not a C developer, and he was able to build this application that was very effective, and it's much more efficient than the handwritten C code that we had from a couple of years ago, which is that's great, right? But I don't think that we're ever gonna reach a world where you can have a salesperson build a B2B SaaS from the ground up. Um, for the reason that there is still some friction that requires an engineer or developer. Uh, like Adam would have to describe fully how he wants this thing architected, right? You still need a developer to understand what kind of database would I need to do. Is this right? Like, is it right that I'm building this local application that needs a Kubernetes cluster with 10 nodes in it, right? That's not right. You still need someone who understands the technical side of things before building it. I think vibe coding, that's the term they're using, is vibe coding uh for non-engineering people is just never going to reach that point that someone without any technical background could build a fully working production application. I think it's either not gonna work or we're like years away from something like that happening. But anyone with a technical background now has a way to go from 0 to 100 really, really quickly once they get to learn this tool set.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I know we're nearing sort of the time slot here, but I wanted to maybe open up the chat window, take a look at some of the Q&A or questions that people have. Appreciate everybody for joining, and hopefully you picked up a few tidbits. And yeah, I would say, you know, operationally, some of these little apps that I've been talking about support the security teams here, and a lot of the work that we're doing, and are things that are written in a matter of hours, if not a day or two. So, for building sort of operational tasks and applications that just again speed up the day to day, I'd say that's a really great use case right now that we've been finding around AI, and securing it. I think is still evolving, but it's one of those things that we are obviously exploring as we continue to do this type of development. So let me take a look at some of the questions we've got here. Besides the question around agentic AI, says been
I think
using.
that's the right approach. Someone said they've
Okay,
been adopting that approach where you treat it like a real person. I think that's completely the way you want to do it. I think they're even sometimes it could be as unreliable as a real person. So you don't want to grant access to to some random person to be able to make major changes to your production database. And so that's the right way to approach it. For that
right,
next
and a lot of
one,
that's being
yeah.
controlled by the MCP servers, right? Is like what you're
Yeah.
publishing, what you're giving people access to within whatever application,
Hmm.
right? The way that you sort of expose that to AIs is via these MCP servers. So,
Yeah.
for the time being, maybe reserve some of those real critical functions that do have, say, the impact to delete a production database, right? Like, probably don't want to expose that capability just
Yeah.
yet. So,
And
all right, cool.
someone actually did that recently. Like that was
Yeah,
a
no,
big
I know
issue,
exactly what you're talking
and
about.
so just watch out for things like that.
So
For the
one of those
next
vibe
question,
coding gone wrong type.
yeah, yeah, don't do things like that if you don't know what you're doing. Okay. How do context windows differ on locally run models versus state-of-the-art models? So, a lot of the models from Anthropic and OpenAI have context windows of 250K to 500K. I think Google Gemini has context lengths of up to 1 million tokens. We are able to run like on my laptop now with 128 gigs of RAM. I can run models of up to around 80 billion parameters with a context window of 256,000. Now, there's ways to extend the context window using more technical techniques, rope and yarn. Um, these are just scaling algorithms that can extend context windows. And if you want to talk about that further, like we can do that. But there are ways to extend the context window, and I'd say pretty much it's on par. Now we're seeing the world where there are these million token context windows from the Google models, and some of these open source models already support that. But most of them support like 128 to 256,000 tokens. Um,
Yeah,
how would you
this
be
this next
handling not?
question's good too. Yeah. So, which is
Um,
kind of what we were talking about, right? Is how do
yeah.
you, so somebody who isn't a sort of maybe classically trained developer or has been, developing software and sort of self-taught over and has done so
Mhm.
over years and years, right? Is how do we prevent issues? I know. So just to kick off this piece of this, right, is you can ask it. You can ask the AI to say, hey, you know, do you review this code for any security flaws in it? Right? And sometimes that's enough to sort of kick it into at least looking at the code, right? And sort of accounting for some of those things like SQL injection and input standardization, right? Those kind of really cool easy use cases.
And I can tell you it will not catch it 90% of the time. And
Yeah,
and
not
that's
it's
that
not one hundred
that's
percent reliable for sure.
yeah. And that's the crux of it, right? You just need one vulnerability to screw everything up. And so like it's definitely something that people really want to lean into, that there will be this world where we can get non-developers to generate AI code. And there's an entire, like, if you go to subreddit, to Reddit, there's this entire subreddit about vibe coders, and like it's like a people learning how to code by using this vibe coding thing. And recently, all of the posts are like, I'm 6 months into building my application, I still don't understand code, and now everything's broken, and now I actually had to pay a developer to fix my things. And that's what we're finding is like uh, someone who's a non-developer trying to generate code will eventually hit this point where it will just stop working, or there's a lot of vulnerabilities. And I think there was this recent study that found that LLMs generate more vulnerable code than your average developer. And so if you are going to be giving people the ability to write code like this, I don't think it should be used in production without proper scanning. Uh, like like all of the things that we're doing with shift left security for code development, where you have these CI/CD pipelines that do scan this code for vulnerabilities, that checks it, that lints it, that makes sure that all of these things that are usually missed by regular developers are caught in before it's deployed in production. So that's the way I see it, at least, is we shouldn't be giving non-developers ways to create production applications without proper scanning.
Yeah, and I actually had a conversation with one of the product managers of one of these companies that makes an enterprise class like static code analyzer, and that was my question too to was you know, in a lot of cases, AI can sort of suggest a fix to the code, right? Why is it that we sort of can't just simply have the AI detect all the flaws to begin with? Like clearly, in a lot of cases, it can actually write the fix. So why can't it detect the issue to begin with? Um, and I don't think they had a good answer for that. But what they said is, in comparing, they're obviously working on that, right? Especially when you talk about like discovering new classes of vulnerabilities, right, at the code level. Um,
Mhm.
they're certainly working on their projects. Yes, AI is obviously going to be a component of that, but it turns out, yeah, at the time they were saying, look, they've been running a lot of tests and benchmarking against it, and the old way and sort of the ways that they've sort of built the tools to detect these kinds of flaws at the code level are still far superior to sort of
Mhm.
having vanilla AI go after that. And obviously they're augmenting it. I know it's coming. It's being worked on, but yeah, I think to your point, it's not there yet. So if you're gonna
Yep.
publish a production application, you're going to want to put it under the same controls and the same sort of restrictions that you had, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't think AI is going to
Mhm.
sort of magically fix everything.
Yeah. I think there was this recent article I read about how the first CVE of AI discovered vulnerability just came out. And that was an interesting read because uh, we're reaching that point where AI can, like, if you give it enough time and enough resources and enough context and information, it could probably already find vulnerabilities in code, very much like a pen tester would. But it's not at the point where we can trust it entirely to find those vulnerabilities. And you
Right.
still need that person behind the wheel to be checking these things. You need these tooling to catch those vulnerabilities like SQL injection and buffer overflows and stuff like that. That LLMs, they just for some reason miss it, because the way I see it is it was trained on human code, and humans are bad coders for the most part. So I think that's kind of why it produces this, and so it's just we're gonna need these scanning for the foreseeable future.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think we can wrap it here. Carlos, appreciate taking the time to chat with me today on this stuff, and thanks for everybody for joining this session. And like I said, hopefully you guys picked up something interesting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys so much for coming today. We appreciate you. We'll be sending out the recording as soon as it becomes available. And if you have any further questions, we can connect you with John and Carlos. You guys just let us know. And you guys have a great rest of your day.